Hello everyone, happy Wednesday. Today we are on lesson 6 of our quarterly lessons from the history of Israel, and we are on Wednesday's lesson, a bad habit. What sin was frequent in Israel's journey, and how was it punished? 1 Corinthians 10 verse 10. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Exodus 16 verse 8. And Moses said, This shall be, when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, for that the Lord heareth your murmurings which ye murmur against him. And what are we? Your murmurings are not against us, but against the Lord. And Numbers 14 verse 27. How long shall I bear with this evil congregation which murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me. And verse 36. And the men which Moses sent to search the land, who returned and made all the congregation to murmur against him, by bringing up a slander upon the land. And Numbers 11 verse 1. And when the people complained, it displeased the Lord, and the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled again, and the fire of the Lord burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 379, says, Murmurings and tumults had been frequent during the journey from the Red Sea to Sinai, but in pity for their ignorance and blindness, God had not then visited the sin with judgments. But since that time he had revealed himself to them at Horeb. They had received great light, and as they had been witnesses to the majesty, the power, and the mercy of God, and their unbelief and discontent incurred the greater guilt. Furthermore, they had covenanted to accept Jehovah as their king, and to obey his authority. Their murmuring was now rebellion, and as such it must receive prompt and signal punishment, if Israel was to be preserved from anarchy and ruin. The fire of Jehovah burnt among them, and consumed them that were in the uttermost parts of the camp. The most guilty of the complainers were slain by lightning from the cloud. So we see that in these verses, and also in the paragraph, the sin murmuring, complaining are repeated over and over. So this was a very big problem with the Israelites, and God was patient with them, but eventually he did reach his limit, and he did send fire to consume the most guilty of them. Why were most of the Israelites who left Egypt not able to enter the promised land? And why are God's people today journeying for such a long time in this wicked world? Hebrews 3 verses 16 to 19. For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest? But to them that believed not. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. And Hebrews 4 verses 1 and 2. Let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. So we see that Hebrews 3 verse 19 says, So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. So it was unbelief that kept Israel out of Canaan, and it is also unbelief that is keeping us from going to heaven sooner, delaying the second coming of Jesus. Evangelism, page 696 says, For 40 years did unbelief, murmuring, and rebellion shut out ancient Israel from the land of Canaan. The same sins have delayed the entrance of modern Israel into the heavenly Canaan. In neither case were the promises of God at fault. It is the unbelief, the worldliness, unconsecration, and strife among the Lord's professed people that have kept us in this world of sin and sorrow so many years. So unbelief, which leads to murmuring, which leads to rebellion, worldliness, unconsecration, strife among the Lord's people, that is what keeps us out of heaven. What is the root of murmuring, and how can we overcome it? Romans 11 verse 20 says, Well, because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. Acts of the Apostles, page 326 says, like incense, the fragrance of the gospel was to be diffused throughout the world. To those who should accept Christ, the message would be a savor of life unto life, but to those who should persist in unbelief, a savor of death unto death. So we see that it was because of unbelief that led to murmuring, because when the Israelites didn't trust God to supply their needs, that's when they complained that they didn't have food, that they didn't have water, that they didn't have protection from their enemies. And that is the greatest antidote to murmuring, when we leave everything in God's hands, when we trust God that He will provide for us and that He is giving us everything that is good for us. That is a big antidote to murmuring. So may we have faith, may we practice being cheerful, may we practice counting our blessings so that we can avoid murmuring and that we can hasten the second coming of Christ. Amen.